Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. The title of this says Hemp Potential, and I know that the title on the poster was a lot longer than Hemp Potential. But as I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today to make it interesting, there's a smorgasbord of things. As what was told, I am Jane Kolodinski. I'm from the Department of Community Development and Applied Economics at the University of Vermont. I chair that department, and I'm also acting Associate Dean of Research there. And I was just so fortunate enough to receive a Fulbright chair in, I think your chair was called food safety. And this isn't about food safety, although it could be. I'm so pleased that you invited me, and I'm so pleased to be here. And I'm so pleased to be here in person, even though there's only 3 people in the audience. So let me give you a little bit of background. I like to consider the work that I'm doing in the area of hemp as building a hemp consortium. And so we're in the middle of a United States Department of Agriculture foundational grant. We're in year 2 of 3 to study the economic impact of a hemp industry in 3 states in the US. So we have Vermont in the Northeast, Kentucky in the Southeast, and Colorado, which is in the West. And we're building an in-plan model to look at economic impact. However, there are no social accounting matrices for hemp. It didn't exist in the United States for at least 50 years. So we have to build the social accounting matrices, which means every part of the industry, from growing to processing to manufacturing to distribution to consumer demand, all by hand, basically. So we are in the middle of that process, and we are pretty sure we have the Kentucky social accounting matrix figured out, and the others, we know what data we're going to use for Vermont and Colorado. But that is no small task, and I am not an in-plan expert. I can understand in-plan and economic impacts with your direct effects, your indirect effects, and your induced effects, but I have colleagues who are very good at that. That is what they do. We also have a national sample or a national survey going into the field, hopefully next week, for the entire US. That will be a Qualtrics sample, but we're first going to gather with Mechanical Turk a sample from Amazon, because I personally did not, quote unquote, grow up in my professional life believing that panels that you buy are representative samples of any area. And now we seem to be moving into purchasing these panels from companies like Qualtrics and Mechanical Turk from Amazon. And I personally have trouble, because these are people, well, people always choose to answer your survey, but these are people who do this for a living, right? They signed up for this panel, they're getting paid to fill out surveys. So I wonder, so we're going to compare the Mechanical Turk sample with the Qualtrics sample to see what happens. And eventually we hope to have 2,500 consumer samples. We're also in the middle of what we're calling the Glossary Project. In the US, because hemp was illegal for 50 years, we had a state-by-state promulgation of their own hemp rules. And so we looked at 62 different hemp plans. That includes the federal plan that was approved, I think, in March. And then there are 62. Now, of course, the United States has 50 states, and Puerto Rico, which isn't a state. But we also have a variety of First Nations, which were allowed to develop their own hemp plans. And what we realized in these hemp plans, now I'm a consumer demand economist, and I thought these hemp plans would include everything from production through manufacturing, through marketing, through consumer demand. And basically what they are is a regulatory plan that says, better keep your THC out of the hemp. And so most of the plans really are dealing with a regulatory environment and haven't touched on anything else. So the team, and this was a team of graduate students who headed this up, are almost at the manuscript stage, and they got a lot more than they bargained for in doing a content analysis of 62 plans. There were thousands of words, and across the country, nobody was using the same vocabulary for the same thing. So we're hoping that this is going to be useful in the future. And what's really interesting is we're trying to get towards policy. And how can I put this? The policy really should be aimed at developing consistent rules so that there can be cross-state, read cross-province commerce with regard to hemp, that individual states should probably follow national standards, which say everybody measures the THC content at the same time. Is it when you're growing it? Is it after processing? That there should be a consistent amount that is allowed, et cetera. And that doesn't exist right now. So there is no capital market for the hemp industry. You can't borrow money. Nobody's investing in, there's no futures market in the hemp industry. And right now, if one state develops a hemp product that doesn't meet the other state's rules, there cannot be any interstate commerce. So that's really where we're headed in the policy arena. So that is our $500,000 USDA foundational grant, which it says it's about the economic impact of a hemp industry, but it has a lot of different moving pieces. Then there's my USDA Hatch project, which is the Agricultural Experiment Station project. And that one is just starting, and it's on clean labels and novel products, where I'm looking at hemp and local and organic and origin labels on hemp products, as well as a product which I'm not going to talk about today, but I'm finding fascinating, which is the most expensive herb in the world, and that's saffron, which you can grow in Vermont. I'm sure you can grow it in Canada too, because it likes cold winters, and it's basically a crocus, but it's a special kind of crocus. We're already realizing that there are counterfeit crocus corms being sold out there that might be actually toxic, but that's a whole other story, and I'd love to talk about that next time I come back. There's also the USDA Agricultural Research Service Food System Center grant, which the University of Vermont is the first university in 20 years to have a new agricultural research service center, and ours is on small and medium and regionally sized food systems. And the first project was a call for proposals to develop metrics to measure success in small and medium regional food systems. And so I pitched a proposal, again, on novel products, value-added novel products, and we used hemp as the example. And so following FAO, we see that any successful food system should have economic indicators, social indicators, and environmental indicators. So we've been developing metrics along with 6 other projects at our university that covered a whole variety of things. One group was looking at agritourism. One group was looking at soil health. One group was really looking at community social connections, and we're trying to boil down all of these measures that people came up with into metrics, of which hemp is going to be a leader. Then there is another grant. This is a $350,000 grant from USDA, but it's our REEU, which is Research and Extension Experiences for Undergraduates. And we had 14 undergraduates here this summer, no small feat. Last year it was postponed 1 year, and we couldn't postpone it again. But this grant is to really engage underserved populations across the US to look at employment in the agricultural sectors later on. So we had 14 students, and we were looking at agricultural transition using the lens of hemp. So that was anything. The students had a few days in hemp genomics, then they went to production, then they went to pest scouting. And of course, as an applied consumer demand economist, I had them do a social research study, or a social science research study, where they developed a survey and administered it at a farmer's market in Burlington. But I want to say that that experience, the students went back. One went back to Tuskegee Historically Black Institution in Alabama, and that student said, I really want to do this in Alabama. And then I had my colleague in Colorado and my colleagues in Kentucky, and I had 2 students from Vermont who are now going to collect data in New York State. And I have one of my good friends who actually, Carola Gravitas, yes, one of my best colleagues, said to say hello because she did a postdoc She did a postdoc here. And so we're going to collect the farmers market data, looking at more of suspects in terms of consumer demand for local products, value added, because the last thing that we really want to do is for hemp to become a commodity like dairy is in the US, where the farmer is just a victim of market prices and doesn't reap any of the benefits, and those benefits are developed as you move up the value chain. And then finally, we have our Gun Center for the Environment Catalyst Award, which it's only $50,000, which I also spent a lot of time on today on the phone. We are doing discrete choice experiments now in Canada too, because my host, Ellen Goddard, received an award to look at discrete choice experiments with the textile department, Patricia Dolez, and we hope to do to field some of those in the next, I don't know, hopefully in the next month nationally, looking at 2 different products. We know that bed linens will be one of them in terms of sustainability and characteristics. And we're talking sheets and blankets, things that actually touch your skin that people would be concerned about in terms of sustainability and toxicity. So that we fielded that in the US, a national one on CBD, which is not so interesting in Canada, but CBD is where the craze went in the US. And if we don't get off of that craze, that CBD bubble has already burst. And as I go through my presentation, you'll see why. And then also we have supermarket scanner data, the home scan panel, IRI data, which I just met with my team this morning. And believe it or not, there are over 400 products just sorting 2 million UPC codes. Thank God I have a data whiz on that project. 2 million UPC codes searching for the word hemp, and we still have to expand it, but there were at least in 2019, 300 products. So we're really trying to look at the hemp landscape from, that's not a hand, right? The hemp landscape from all the way from genomics to production, to processing, to manufacturing, to consumer demand. Because if consumers aren't going to demand these products, there's really no hope for the industry. And in the end, we're really looking for lively rural community development, right? How can we bring back rural America and maybe Canada to have a vibrant economy focused around the entire value chain and not just be a raw commodity provider in terms of producing commodities such as canola or soy or corn. Okay, that was a lot of background, but that's kind of gives you a sense of where I am. So my team right now is Tyler Mark and Will Snell from the University of Kentucky, and we will actually be in Kentucky next week, along with USDA, Rebecca Hill from Colorado State, myself, Steve Costell, Eric von Wetberg, Heather Darby, and Sarah Heiss from the University of Vermont, Ellen Goddard and Patricia Dolez here from the University of Alberta, and a whole host of graduate and undergraduate students. So now we're going to really have a little song and dance. This is part of a presentation that I gave at a national symposium, and it was pretty well received. So here we go. So here is a little bit of a timeline, and here I'm starting in the 1600s, but hemp goes way farther back than the 1600s. But when you ask the general public what kind of things they know about hemp, they really know about ropes and sailing ships and fabrics like that. They don't really know much else about hemp. But then when we look in the late 1800s, cotton kind of took over. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Low-cost imports of jute began to compete, and so on. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act banned hemp, even though they are not the same thing at all because of THC content. And we had a war effort where hemp was used again. It then came the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control, which distinguished hemp from marijuana, but continued to regulate them as class 2 drug. Sorry, I don't remember. And then in Canada, you are 25 years ahead of us. In 94, you had research licenses for hemp, and you are in 98, you had commercial cultivation for hemp, which continues today. We did not have a national farm bill for hemp in the US until 2018. But what came before all this? So archaeologists found remnants of hemp dating back to 8,000 BC. So this is really a long-standing product. Hemp has been grown for a long time. We say that there are 50,000 different products hemp can be turned into. They found it in China, they found it in Europe, etc. And if you can see, that's a hemp leaf on the top of what to me looks like an walk like an Egyptian person. In France, France has cultivated hemp for at least 700 years. Spain and Chile similarly. Russia was a major supplier for hundreds of years. And in the UK, Henry VIII, another famous, I'm thinking of all these songs. I'm Henry VIII, I'm thinking about Walk Like an Egyptian. Maybe you have to be a certain age, but this audience probably knows those songs. He compelled landowners to sow at least a quarter acre of hemp or be fined. So hemp was a really, really important crop. And then my favorite one, and you can read this slide or look at it later, but Samuel de Champlain mentioned it in 1605. So Vermont is on Lake Champlain, that the natives used wild hemp to tie their fish hook, their bone fish hooks to. So that's right in my backyard. Of course, George Washington grew hemp, but in 1760 he decided you should grow wheat instead of hemp. And hopefully that's not gonna play. And the ethnologist describes the recovery of large pieces of hemp fabric in Tennessee. And here's just some examples. So here are all the different uses, 50,000 different uses, from industrial textiles to paper to building materials. We haven't even touched building materials, foods, industrial products. You can use the stalk, the leaves, the flower, and the seeds. And I will say my understanding is that in Canada, and seeds really are grain, we call them grain, that in Canada you really grow hemp for the grain. In the US, it's only been for the flowers, which means we're leaving a lot of the plant as a waste product. And so we're trying to think about how to change that. So now, for those of you who are interested in industrial organization and antitrust laws, so the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 was part of the Industrial Revolution in the US, and hemp harvesting was very intensive during that time. And it was even more difficult to process that hemp, and that's called decorticization. You need decorticate. And there's a hidden figure, George Schlichten, and he patented a machine for separating the fiber from the internal woody core, and he reduced labor costs by a factor of 100 and increased the yield significantly. Now, for all of us ag economists out there, we know that efficiency, 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 right? We should produce more with less. So this was, and in that time, in the early 1900s, this was truly a significant accomplishment. So he solved an age-old problem. He invented a machine. He patented that machine. He put a lot of his own money into it, and he was backed by J.D. Rockefeller, one of the robber barons in the early Americas. And he was so impressed, he tried to buy exclusive rights to both the invention and the crop. And Schlichten said, no, he's like on Shark Tank, and he was a little cocky and said, no, I'm not going to give you all the equity in my firm. So we had 1917, we had a bumper crop, and with the US entering World War I, newspapers began to face shortages of wood pulp, and he had the answer with mountains of herds and his machine created lots of good paper. He actually explained the environmental impact of deforestation in 1917. Think about that today. We're talking about how much paper we use and recycling paper, and he actually said, further logging would be prohibitively expensive and even forbidden. And I look back at that and I think, wow. So all the men involved, a man named McCrae, Chase, and Scripps, and I think we know the name Scripps, were all in favor. 2 weeks later, without any an explanation, they pulled their investment. And this is where, for me, it gets even more interesting. Part of the story is we had Henry Dupont. Now, what did Dupont make? DuPont's all about nylon and petroleum-based products. He's not going to invest in hemp because it's competing directly against the Industrial Revolution and this increase in uses for petroleum and petroleum waste. And so he pulled out of it. We do know that Henry Ford had a hemp car and was developing hemp plastics, but it wasn't big. But then the perfect storm came, and the US government in 1937 saw hemp as a threat. I don't want to show you that either. And the Marijuana Tax Act came from 1937. And I have to say, this is really an example of explicit racism, because it was Mexicans are bad, they smoke marijuana, and they're going to steal your women. I mean, so this perfect storm came with the Industrial Revolution, the difficulty in processing hemp, new inventions that are better than old inventions, and in the US, hemp was gone. But then it came back in 2014. We had some research centers that could apply to grow hemp, and in 2018, the Farm Bill in the US was signed into law. So let's move into that's all background. Let's move into some actual research. And we're looking at consumer perceptions of hemp products, and it's an application of both the theory of buyer behavior and the diffusion of innovations. Now, as I said, we have a versatile crop. It might be more sustainable. We're still looking into the actual sustainability of hemp. It is possible. It sequesters more carbon than other crops. It's an annual crop that doesn't take years to grow. It may have health benefits, etc. And we submitted a $10 million SAS grant to USDA, and we did not get the funding, but one of the sub-projects on that was to actually take the spent seed cake from pressing oil and feed it to dairy cows, because apparently it has an amino acid profile that is conducive to raising animals. But as of now, you cannot feed any hemp product to farm animals. So what's interesting here is we have this, I keep wanting to go here and look at the screen, but it's not there. We have this renewed interest in hemp. And sometimes when we look at communication and mass communication, we can see that it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So between 2015 and 2018, we saw this huge increase in newspaper and mass media mentions of hemp, and it was going to be this wonderful savior for the rural economy. And you can look both at mass media, and you can look at Google interest. And I find that it's really quite simple to do these searches. And you can see that we really peaked in 2019, and since then we've been on the decline. And not only is there a decline in what I'm going to call publicity is really free advertising and marketing for companies. So in the US, there wasn't a lot being spent on advertising companies. It was word of mouth. It was, oh, we have this hemp product. It's all purchased online, and they really relied, this is an assertion I'm making, it's a testable hypothesis, they relied on the buzz that was created by the media. And that buzz not only decreased since 2019, it's actually become negative. So we know, people like you and I know that you don't just, plant a crop or start a business without any business acumen, without knowing to have a contract at the end so someone will buy your product, to not make shady or shoddy investments, to not just land grab and say, I live in the big city, hemp is going to make me millions of dollars to do that. And everything that could go wrong went wrong. And the media picked up on this and just said, oh, hemp is a big bust, at least in the United States. Hemp is a big bust. It's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I'm thinking, sometimes we do the same thing when we have these notions of inflation or notions of shortages now in the supply chain given COVID. It's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? There's no toilet paper. Oh, I better go buy my toilet paper. Or you know, we are looking at the bright side. Prices are now going to fall. We're going to go into a deflationary period and people are better, or we're going to go into an inflationary period and people's behavior change based on expectations or impressions or perceptions of what might happen in the future. So this slide is just an example that I think I'm asserting that the media is actually hurting the industry. We did yes.
One quick question is
sure.
That when it dropped off with media attention, was that maybe associated with legalization? You know, there's a lot of interest during periods of legalization, like certain states were legalizing cannabis use, and then it's sort of the interest dropped off because legalization wasn't really in the news anymore.
Wow, you're headed into a whole other thing that we could spend 45 minutes talking about, which is did a lot of people get into what was legalized in hemp because they really want to get into the marijuana business and not the hemp business? Because they're two different things. So we're talking about no more than 0.3% of THC in these hemp products. So I think if you're talking about the relationship with drugs, no.
But CBD is a part of cannabis industry. Right?
Yeah,
and that's a search term you were looking at.
Yes, but CBD also can't have more than 3% THC in it. So yes, absolutely, it could have been that. Why the media loses interest in something, I don't know. Fly by night, I don't know. So I got to get back in my head. So we gave a national symposium, and my team at the University of Vermont and my grad student were really interested in the consumer part. And in this whole national symposium that was put on by Colorado State, they did a survey at the end there were about 200 participants. And the number one thing that the participants, mostly of which were industry people, said is, we need to know about the market. Like, bing, that's us. That's what we do. So let's start looking at consumer demand, because they have no idea. They have no idea about what the potential market is. And as we all know, CBD is not the end of the rainbow. In fact, my colleague Tyler Mark from the University of Kentucky, who's the production economist, said in the US, we have already grown and stored enough CBD to last us for the next 60 years. So that's not going to drive the market. It has to be something else. So we looked, the current literature when we started was limited to a little bit about CBD demand in the US. We figured that the demographic data alone were insufficient and that there's a gap in the influence in perceptions on use. So this is a basic old 1970s model of consumer behavior where you have a new product, and actually the marketers use this as a new brand. And we said, well, when do you have a whole new product category to look at? It's really hard. So here we just made the analogy brand for product, and you're either aware or unaware, right? And if you're aware, then you get to, if you're unaware, there is a potential there to help people increase their awareness. And we eventually used a Heckman two-stage double hurdle model. If you're aware, there's three possibilities. I've chosen it, I rejected it, or I'm somewhere in the middle. I really don't know. And what we're finding is that inert set, there's a lot of people in the I don't know. So we don't know of the people who chose it, how much are they going to repeat by? And then there's a lot of people that are on the fence. We just don't know what they're going to do. When you tie that in with the diffusion of innovations model, which is also from the 80s, you look at who's going to adopt products. They should have a relative advantage, perceived better than the alternative for many reasons. And we're hypothesizing it could be sustainability reasons. It could be environmental reasons. It could be perceived as higher quality, etc. Is it compatible with its alternatives? And if you've never tried it, how do you know that it's compatible? Is it easy to use or understand compared to alternatives? Is it easy to try? an experiment before adoption, and have I seen other people using it? So what we tried to do was to put these two models together. And I'm really talking for Hannah Lacasse, who was my MS student, who's now in our new PhD program in Sustainable Development Policy, Economics, and Governance at UVM. And we're continuing this work. So we started with just a statewide survey, and now the survey that I suggested was going national. It's based on these preliminary data. So we've got some questions on diffusion of innovations. We have some questions on hemp perceptions, including the THC content. We have questions on how do you see marijuana and hemp, and of course our demographics. And then we chose 8 categories: CBD, clothing, construction material, food products, paper, personal care products, plastic, and rope. Now, plastic, anybody see the Lego commercial that says they're making their Legos out of hemp? Yeah, kind of amazing, right? It's amazing. It's the next frontier. And I'm giving away secrets, but my colleague, Steve Costell, who's really a paper maker, but is prototyping a lot of different things to do with hemp. And he's working with our engineers to develop a hydrophobic coating from hemp resins that can be put on a hemp paper clamshell to replace all that plastic stuff, one-use plastic stuff that we're especially using now with COVID. Your salads get in there and so on. But the problem with cardboard containers is, as you know, as soon as you put a hamburger or a salad in there, what does it do? It kind of just like droops. So it's got to go with the hydrophobic coating. It's just fascinating, everything that we can do with hemp. Okay, so here, this is really interesting. When we just look, before we do any econometrics, when you just look at who's aware of things, CBD, clothing, rope, people are they've heard about that. They don't know where they've heard about it, but they've heard about it. Of course, CBD was all over the market, but clothing and rope, and there was an association between older age and knowing about clothing and rope. So if you were a child of the 70s, you know, it was like a hippie yippie thing to have a hemp bag or something. And rope, it's like the older part of the sample, 70 and 80-year-olds, they knew about rope because they knew about sailing ships. Less for food, more for personal care products. So these are just the landscape. And then when we asked, have you bought it? Would you buy it again, or don't you know? The inert set, which is that wishy-washy people, I'll call them, that's the tan. And I don't know if it's showing up as tan on your computer, but that's the landscape. So there is opportunity to, because less than 50% of the people said they would reject it. So any product or product categories for which you have 50% of the people that are interested, that's big. There's potential there. So I'm not going to go through all of these. How are we doing on time?
Good. You have 45 minutes.
I'm in for 45 minutes.
Yeah, we go to 5.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk for 45 more minutes. I'm
So
hoping that.
you have a lot.
Okay, I have a lot of time, but I'm still not going to go through every one of these. So this is a lot of regression analysis. So first of all, we have limited dependent variables, right? We have, did you use it, or are you aware of it? Yes, no, there's the first hurdle. And then we have multinomial logit in terms of, have you used it? Will you use it again? Will you reject it? So we have 2 sets of limited dependent variables. And one of my former graduate students, who's now a full professor, he likened this to, he goes, I understand double hurdle models because, and he drew hurdles, like track hurdles on the board. And he said, yeah, it's kind of like a likelihood function, right? You have to jump over the first one and then you have to jump over the second one. So we use limited dependent variable analysis to the sample selection model, which is typically jump over the first hurdle, yes or no, and then an OLS, but we don't have a continuous second stage. We have a categorical second stage. So these slides just tell you the probability that, you know, before I showed you the raw data and how many people were aware and what set they were in. And this one tells you after you control for all of our independent variables that measure demographics and people's perception regarding the environment and regulation and local, and then the diffusion of innovation categories this tells you how well you did and will result in a probability prediction. So when you look at CBD, about a third will reject it, 25 don't know, and 39% have chosen it. In the United States, this was big, but then again, CBD was all the rage. And just in this cross section, it explained 34% of the variation within the awareness set, which is really unheard of in cross section. I'm used to seeing R squares of, these are pseudo R squares, right? The counterpart to on OLS R square. But in cross section to have 34% of your variation explained, you know, we're used to seeing 12, 15. So then we can look at hemp clothing. And again, the blue, you can just look at this and say, oh, these are the things that are significant.
Can you remind us, what is trial? What's trial in your independent list?
I bought it once. I tried it. I actually tried it. Oh, you guys have to watch it online because
That's fine.
Watching it on our phones.
Yeah, we all.
It's like I thought, I'm being so boring. They're all doing their
Now
email.
we're watching.
That's, we're not reading our emails.
You're all reading your email. So construction materials, there wasn't enough variation because they really don't exist yet. All of these, although I will say, I've been in the hemp business for a really long time. I'll age myself. I'm like 100 years old, and I looked at hemp in the 90s, and it was, Europe was subsidizing it, went to this huge conference on an expo on hemp in Frankfurt, and then went on to a natural and bast fibers conference in Poland, where I actually was robbed on the train. And they were using hemp building materials. What they did was they, in Germany, a lot of buildings are not made out of wood, except when you're in the south of Germany. They're really made out of concrete and so on. And they would put hemp stalks into the plaster material. And so I'm not an engineer, but if you know, when you can trap the air, so they had the hemp stalks in the plaster material that they would use as a plaster on the wall, and it would be an insulating material. They also were developing hemp barriers inside airplanes so that the plastic could give in between the air, you know, because airplanes have to move or we would just all crack and fall out of the sky. Garden mats, which I believe it's a low price, high volume right now. I don't know how you do it in Canada, but in the US, when you're growing CBD hemp, not hemp that grows like flax or wheat, that's a different kind of hemp, they use black plastic. It's all black plastic. And we know that the microparticles from plastic are not good. So if you can use the waste from the stalks to make mats that will keep the weeds down, you know, all the better. But anyway, my point here is there aren't enough hemp construction materials to do the second stage of use. We can look at food products. And with food products, to explain almost 50% of the variation, I'm amazed. But not many people have actually tried. 18% of people said they have tried hemp foods. Hemp paper, personal care products, which is mostly hemp oils. So you can think this is the processing of the grain. And again, hemp plastics, we really don't have a lot of experience.
Jane,
Yes.
can you take a quick question from the chat?
Oh, sure.
So
And
Michael
Rob.
is asking, is there a generational gap before and after 75 years old? So Michael, do you want to explain your question?
Yeah, so for what I'm doing for my thesis, I'm trying to think about whether I should split off age as a dummy variable or just keep it as the continuous variable. So I'm wondering, Jane, how did you choose 75 years old? Was that the cutoff when there was more legislation prohibiting marijuana?
No, I was just talking. So yours is a very interesting econometric question in terms of, you know, as econometricians and applied economists, we always say we want the continuous variable, right? We don't like categorical variables because continuous variables act in a much better way. We can say so much more. We can calculate, you need elasticities, all these, you know, all these kinds of things. And if we actually collected the data continuously, and the way we collect this, and you have a lot of missing values when you ask people their age. So we kind of sneak up on them and saying, what year were you born?
Yep.
And then, and then you calculate their age. But just eyeballing the data in the beginning, we really did see that there were certain age groups that were, so I'll say associated, it's not causation, it's associated with the knowledge of different products. So CBD, everybody knew about it, everybody from young to old, right? And older people like it because it might help you with your inflammation in your joints, and younger people might like it because it's new and might make you relaxed and they think it has THC in it. I don't know. So I think it depends on your problem. And I think you need to look at your data and your question to determine whether or not eventually you're going to use a categorical variable or a continuous variable. Yeah.
So for your data set, it was a clear distinction around that age, whether with people's knowledge and familiarity with the product?
Yeah, there was. So I can, in general, not tell you what the age was, but that older people, the older portion of the sample, were more familiar with hemp rope and paper. The middle-agers were more familiar with hemp clothing, and I think back to the 70s. Everybody knew about CBD, and so that's basically what I can say there. But you need to look at your data set, and of course, if there's a U-shaped correlation, you know that anything in a linear regression isn't going to help you anyway because you're going to get squat, right? So all of those things you have to think about in terms of measurement.
That's something to consider. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So I didn't want to ponder on all those other tables because all those individual results, because here it is in one lovely visual. So you can see the probit results, significant variables that increase the probability of awareness. You can see the probability that we predicted, and the probability of rejection is in red, of not knowing is, we should have had yellow, but you wouldn't be able to see it. It's like the stoplight, and the probability of choice is green. And then trying to categorize people, which category are they on? Do I reject it? Do I not know, or do I choose it? And we have the variables that increase the probability of choice would be those brown ones, that decrease the probability of rejection are the blue ones, and those that increase the probability of choice and decrease the probability of rejection. In other words, they were significant for both of those categories of choice. And so that's that in a nutshell. So what does all this mean? I mean, you can say, geez, you ran 8 regressions. That's just a lot of stuff. Isn't that like the do too many crosstabs rule, right? But I think what this shows is the characteristics influencing hemp consumption vary by product. This is not it's not just hemp. It's not a one size all. It is that there are different target audiences for different products. There are different probably pitches or marketing campaigns or communication ideas for the different products. And overall and on average across all products, it's really about relative advantage and trialability. So within those messages to different audiences, different target groups for different products, highlighting the relative advantage, no matter how you do that, into which demographic group, and making it easy to try. So this trialability thing, this is one of the reasons why we focused on farmers markets as a subgroup. It's easy to try at a farmer's market. You're talking, you can see it, you can touch it, you can experience the product. Online, that's really hard, isn't it? And if you're in the supermarket and you just see hemp hearts on the shelf, it's really hard for people to try it. So it's interesting that these two characteristics of the diffusion of innovation came out pretty consistent across. The influence of marijuana, we really need to focus on the difference in THC content between hemp and marijuana. It's not the same thing. And interestingly enough, in the US, political affiliation impacts how people feel about the product. And for us, it's the conservatives are like, oh God, we hate hemp. It's like you what'll I say? You you liberal left-wing people, you're the ones that like these hemp products. Hemp is like drugs. We hate drugs. And then it's more people leaning on the progressive side that are more perceptive to hemp, even though hemp is not marijuana. And in Vermont, you can see this is a real sign. We saw people come in and destroy fields of hemp thinking that they were gonna, make millions of dollars by selling it as marijuana. And it just isn't. You can smoke it all you want and it's not gonna really do anything to you. So we have to continue to emphasize the distinction. But then the other marijuana control variables were inconsistent. And so it's this, is it drugs? Isn't it drugs? And so on. So we have to ferret out some more of that. Origin labels that are used to convey quality of product and processing standards. Such standards appear to extend to emerging hemp products. So there might be opportunities for small and regional food systems, as Vermont is. We certainly don't have the scale in the Northeast that you have in your prairie states. I think we're more like Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. But how can we develop those niche markets and have our producers capture some of that value and not have hemp turn into a commodity and producers be price takers? The sustainability framing. There's a common narrative surrounding hemp as its potential as a sustainable and environmentally friendly crop. The perceptions of people don't seem to be translating to actual behaviors, at least in this small sample. So that's an indication of an attitude behavior gap for hemp use. I want to be sustainable, but I'm not yet purchasing these products that might be sustainable. So in conclusion, hemp consumption is influenced by a variety of variables. Just the fact that they are hemp isn't enough. There has to be some relative advantage to the product. We're not just going to substitute hemp for cotton. But this study really did provide a starting point for looking at a wider sample. First of all, we're going into the national sample and to try and develop comprehensive strategies that might help us with the consumer demand side, which is going to drive the manufacturing, the processing, and the production side. Now, my background, so I have my undergraduate is nutrition. I have an MBA that I focused on in marketing, and then I have my PhD is in applied consumption economics with minors in marketing and ag econ. And so from my background and my training, it's not if you make something, they'll come. It's like you probably got to work from both sides. Yes, I have to be able to produce it, but if nobody wants it, then it's just going to flop. So that's why I think that this research is so important, and we're continuing to look at it from general consumer perceptions and self-identified use, ex ante with the discrete choice experiments, which are what might people do if given choices, what are their preferences, and the ex post, which is our IRI supermarket scanner data. So we're trying to come from this in a comprehensive manner. What's next? Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, I'll come full circle. We have our discrete choice experiments in the US and Canada for bed linens and one other product. In Canada, it will be a national sample. I don't know if Ellen, if you're out there in the ether, or Patricia. And in the US, we want to use one additional sample with at least one matching product with Canada, so we can do some international comparisons. And we're hoping to look at the sustainability angle by looking into sustainability indices and so on. And as I said, we're going into the field in the next couple of weeks with our national demand for hemp in the US, and our sample will have at least 25% that have purchased. So our farmers market survey, Edmonton, I don't know if our data are collected yet. I've been out for the last week. I haven't been around. I hope so. We have data from Burlington, Lexington, Kentucky, Tuskegee, Alabama, Fort Collins, Colorado, and hopefully we will have a sample from Phoenix. And this is my colleague, Heather Darby, who is a production person. She's plant and soil science, and she was actually on the inside front cover of the Patagonia catalog, which makes Heather famous. And there's some references for you. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
Phew, that was a lot. Questions? It's Friday afternoon. Everybody just wants to go home.
Any questions in the online audience? Feel free to put your speaker on and ask your question.
Philippe, this is James here.
Hi, James.
So I'm not even supposed to be in one of these sessions. I'm on sick leave, and it'll be obvious why I'm on sick leave in a moment. I'd like to sort of move away from the consumer side and go back to your implant work that you're doing. Last year, both Vic and I were sort of contacted by the Canadian Hemp Growers Association, and they were trying to do, you know, an economic feasibility for hemp. And they gave us some numbers, and I was shocked at how little information there is. The area grown of hemp in both Canada and the US is recorded by Health Canada and the Food and Drug Administration. The only other information that you could get was unit trade values for individual products, but then you have to be able to aggregate up to the actual hemp product. It just seems to me like it's a hornet's nest trying to pull all this stuff together. I admit I spent 3 hours at the most on this, so I don't have a great deal of confidence in what I did, but there was just nothing out there. And I'm a little bit scared with any of these input-output models where they start sort of razzing them to fill things in. Do you have any comments on that?
I do, and it's you're making a really important statement there. You know, there is no social accounting matrix out there for hemp. So my colleague Tyler in Kentucky has been building those production matrices for the last 5 years. And so once he's built those production matrices, we are trying to ground truth them in other states. So we're not going to get a whole one for Canada, a whole one for the United States. The hemp that's grown is different. The markets are different. The processing is different. So we're trying to start with.
But the only production information you have is coming from the FDA. That's it, right?
No, that is not right. So in
You have in this, okay.
So in each of the individual states, there for people who are working on it, and so we have a whole team in Vermont. We're in early. We have a whole team in Kentucky, and there's a whole team in Colorado. They know more about production statistics. Our Vermont State Department of Agriculture fielded a whole survey, and just out the other day is NASS, our National Agricultural Statistical Service, is going to field a farmer production hemp survey. So you're absolutely right. It's nascent. We're building it. So in our sense, when we look at production, we're saying, can we utilize some of the production data that are in like where should we start with? So if you're growing hemp for CBD, it's really like growing specialty fruits and vegetables. It would be like growing tomatoes in a greenhouse. If you're growing fiber CBD, it's really like the flax industry or maybe even the wheat industry. And so we're starting there and then tweaking it with the numbers. In the US, they're now AMS, Agricultural Marketing Service. Tyler has a cooperative agreement with them, are fielding a national hemp producer survey to answer a lot of these questions. We're fielding the National Hemp Demand Survey. We're doing in-depth interviews with processors across the country and manufacturers to try and get exactly what you're saying we don't have. It's nascent, we don't have the information, but if we don't do it, who's gonna do it? And I'll say that Hemp Industry Daily came up with, the multiplier is 9. And we're like,
Oh, it's huge.
where'd you get that from? And they
That's the
they
same
kind of
as
made
the
it up.
Canadians were using.
Yeah, they made it up,
Bizarre.
clearly. Yeah. So, we need $10 million and we can develop, a nice social accounting matrix for hemp, and that's not even every product, right? So we chose grain, and it's going to process through the oil industry. We chose fiber, and it's going to process through, the cotton industry or other fiber industries. And we chose flour, which is going to eventually go through, the tobacco, the tobacco.
Great.
So yeah, really, really good point. We're at the tip of the iceberg, and if we don't have good numbers, it's never going to materialize.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Vic, you have a question?
I guess two parts. One is I'm thinking about your discrete choice experiment. So one piece is going to be on linens or bed linens. I'm curious about how you're going to describe that. So is it mostly on the sustainability angle of hemp versus cotton, or are there others who are more tactile? And then you said another product. I'm just curious about what you're thinking about for the
Yeah,
other product.
you are the discrete choice experiment king. I know that. And so, we'll invite you to all our meetings, but we're thinking about this right now. Patricia's interested in the textiles. She's also interested in PPE, but I think we should do a hospital sample with PPE. That could be anything from face mask, but who knows? COVID might go away and masks will be dead, or even further, hospital gowns and so on, and sustainable fabrics. So sustainability is one of those, and we're looking at indices of what are the characteristics, and some of those things could be, do you just care about a sustainability marker, right? But there's also other characteristics. So when you're talking about bed linens, and I'm not an expert in bed linens, but I love bed linens. So, you're talking about, there are people who like the crisp sheets and there are people who like the silky sheets, right? So, and hemp is not that silky. Hemp is more of the crisp. Would you prefer a blend? How porous is it? Does it breathe? Because I'm telling you, microfiber sheets are pretty bad sheets to sleep in because you just sweat, right? So are they, and we have to narrow down those characteristics so that this is doable, right? So we're only at the tip of the iceberg. It's percolating in our heads. And then again, I think we will do bed linens in the US, and then we want to do one more product, which we're debating about. Is it going to be a pair of jeans, which are kind of diffusing already a little bit? Patagonia is making these jeans, but they're Patagucci. We all know that. So we're debating. And if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Thanks.
I was curious about you talked about your middle category as being inert. I'd never heard of the middle category named that before, but I do have data where I have a lot of people in my middle category as well. And I sometimes struggle with what to do with that, because I can make assumptions about why they're in that middle category, but I don't really know for sure. So I was just wondering if you could just share a little bit about how you think about, large groups of people in your middle category, and how we could analyze those, or how we could test different ways of getting them out of the middle category, or different things that come to mind for you.
Yeah, you're like 10 miles down the road. I mean, we're just now figuring out, are there call them the wishy-washies, right? They don't know what they're going to do. They could go this way, they could go that way. So first it's, to look at their perceptions, their attitudes, their beliefs, their knowledge about the category, and see if there's anything that is more targetable, such as, their demographic profile. So we're just at the descriptive stage. Later on, that's where the communication people come in and they say, oh, you care about sustainability. And I'm going back to the results that we found. You care about sustainability, but you're not walking the walk, you're just talking the talk. So how do you get to that next stage? They're all really good questions, and I for hemp, we just don't have the answers. I didn't make up inert. It goes back to who are those people? Like right now, don't ask me what names are, but
like the opposite of inert would be what, toxic or dangerous? So you're dangerous if you're in the tails.
oh no, I look at interesting. Wasn't thinking about it in those terms. And we didn't make up the word inert. I mean, this is from the 80s, right? These models, they're not
No, I just hadn't heard it before. I'm sure it exists, but yeah.
So if we had the answers, then hemp would already be off the charts. Anyone else? Can ask me anything. Like somebody asked me an econometric question that didn't have anything to do.
I have a question. Philippe?
Yes, go on. Ask.
Oh, I don't see it. Standard. Sorry. Okay, yeah, I couldn't see myself. Hi, Jane. I have an econometric question. It kind of makes me think it's kind of an interesting problem. So you have these two-stage models, right? Where sometimes you talked about Heckman, sometimes you talk about double hurdle. I might label them wrong, but I'm going to call the first stage as the awareness stage.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. And the second stage, I'll just call it consumption or some kind of action. So usually in these models, you need variables that affect awareness, but not consumption. Did you think about this and did you find variables that do that?
I want to say, I want to say constructed, perhaps at this stage, not based on theory, but for a few questions, we only asked them of the awareness people, and they weren't asked of each individual category. So those clearly are going to help you identify the awareness. And then for the individual categories, there are specific variables that go only with those categories. So are you aware of hemp products in general, right? And then if you're, let's say you're doing the hemp clothing, that's there are questions about textiles in there, right? If you're doing the hemp CBD, there are questions about relaxation or whatever. So there are questions or variables, independent variables that are specific to the product.
Okay.
And of course, we know in the Heckman, you know, it's usually a probit OLS. So we're already out of Heckman. It's Heckman-like. And we also know that with our double hurdle models, the two stages, and I'll get to something that I'm going to ask the audience because I find this fascinating, is that what do you do when the variable that indicates degree of use influences the action in the opposite direction than awareness does, right? So, you know, you think about the classic example, damage by a fire, you know, the probability of damage to a fire and the cost of that damage, the probability and the age of the building. So the older the building, the larger the probability of fire. The older the building, the less value of the damage, right? So you have to think about, is it just the variables impact that dependent variable in the same way? So now here's, oh, go ahead.
That problem that you just said is a solved problem because you have two separate stages. So you don't have that problem because you have two separate stages, right?
Yeah, but that one is a truncated regression, and it's a permutation of the standard selection model. But it's not exactly the standard selection model.
But
I guess in the end, they're all the same.
I won't say anything, but I'm just saying that at the end of the day, given that you have a first stage probit and a second stage some weird model, you're still getting two coefficients, right? So as long as you're getting two coefficients, that fire damage that you said, that problem is solved. I think the bigger issue are these identifying variables, because the other things are estimable. You can write the likelihood function for wherever it takes you. You can have a probit first stage and a multinomial logit second, whatever comes out. But I think the biggest thing is having these like broader questions about broader information about textiles that can identify the first from the second, which you said you have.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm gonna throw back a question because so I'm a really good logical statistician, but I don't do the theoretical background. I just don't. I like my stata and my lim-dep to take care of all that. You know, you do the covariance matrix, you make sure I have the right standard errors. I just don't do that stuff, but I'm a really good tactician, not a really good theoretical person. So in my experience over my career, and like I said, I'm 100 years old, we've moved my field. When I'm with the ag economists, my field has gone from trying to be practical and explain things trying to, and I might be speaking heresy, to trying to be so complicated and do the most complicated models that you can, regardless of whether or not in the end they're really what we need. So my question, so lambda is insignificant in all these. The lambda is absolutely insignificant. There is no, and so to me that says there is no reason why I should have to use the information from the first stage in estimating the second stage. Yet, if you were to send a paper out like this, the reviewers would say, well, wait a minute, you have a double hurdle. If you're not aware, you can't be at the second stage. And of course you lose some observations, right? So what do you think? Do we go back to parsimonious, the simplest is the best? Do we look at it both ways and say, look, that we have, it's robust, the estimators are consistent, we don't see a lot of variability, you know, they don't seem to be biased. What's your suggestion?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So if your lambda is insignificant, there's a little more of a robust test to see the irrelevance of the first stage. So I would include that result in a footnote and use the simpler model but you have to give them the real test, showing that there is no selection. And then you can go ahead with the bigger sample model.
Okay, I like that. I actually like it's because it's true, right? It's not any different than zero. So why should we run the complicated model? Then that solves the problem. The first question that you asked me is, are you sure? Right? Are you sure you have?
But in order to do the test, you need those textile variables, right? So
Yeah, you're right.
thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Well, I thank you very much for your time on a Friday afternoon. And Christy was right. She goes, nobody will be upset if we end 10 minutes early.
Yep.
So don't worry about talking so long, but as you can tell, I can talk about this stuff for a long time. I'm very excited about the work I do. I'm very excited and pleased to be here to extend that work and to work with new colleagues and learn new things.
Great.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, have a good night.